so happy to be joined by Lesley Thomson, who's going to start us off with an introduction to herself and a wonderful book.
Right, well, my apparently wonderful book is The Companion, which came out earlier this year, and it's coming out in paperback, I think, in October. And I've been writing, I've been writing since I could hold a pencil, never mind a pen. I was just talking to Caroline about I've always been slightly dyslexic and dyspraxic, which we didn't know when I was young. So I can't spell, failed my English A level, both of them, English Lit and Lang. But I've only ever wanted to read and write. So I carried on, and I've written about 11 or 12 books now, particularly the Detective's Daughter series, which some of you may know, which did very well. It's a bestseller. And a couple of, three standalones, actually, A Kind of Vanishing, and Death of a Mermaid, and The Companion. And The Companion, just to give you a little bit of a précis of it, without giving any spoilers, it's about a young man who takes on the job of being a companion to an older man who lives in a stately home that's been divided into flats. Many of the people living there are quite lonely, really. I mean, it's a beautiful place. They're surrounded by fields. It's a stately home, as I said. But they, they're once they're in their flats, they're on their own, and whatever reason they had to be there, I don't know. It was possibly community, and there isn't really a community. Everybody's a bit grumpy about each other, and Rex, the solicitor, well, he's a defense lawyer, or he was. He's retired. He was lonely, and that's why he's got a companion. And that also, a young man whose job it is to do light duties, keep him company, obviously, and as I say, do some household tasks to keep things going. But he also has his own job, and it allows him to live somewhere lovely for a peppercorn rent, and it gives Rex, as I say, company. But I'm a crime writer, and this is a crime novel. What can go wrong?
So one of my favourite ones of your books is Death of a Mermaid. I absolutely loved it when it came out. It was amazing. And it made me so happy when I realised that The Companion had some of the same returning characters in.
It does. I mean, it's officially a standalone, but there's some characters that have sneaked in from Death of a Mermaid, as you say. Tony Kemp, who is the detective she's the detective in both books, and her sidekick Malcolm Lane, and then Freddie, who's a mobile fishmonger, and Freddie and Tony went to a convent school together. They're both now in their early 40s, but they went to the same convent school. They've been friends. They had a gap. Tony moved to London. She joined the Met Police, but she's come back. And when she comes back, that's Death of the Mermaid, the story there. And they've continued to be friends in The Companion. So Freddie sells fish to the tenants, or they own their flats in the stately home, Blacklock Hall. And so she's on hand when inevitably there is a murder.
Do you think that Freddie and Tony might appear in more books?
I do. I know that Tony will, because writing number 9 in the Detective Daughter series, and which is called The Mystery of Yew Tree House, and Jack and Stella go to stay in the countryside near where his mother grew up with his children as a family holiday to see if it works. And being as it's a crime novel, again, there's a murder, and the detective, because it's Sussex, is Tony Kemp. So Tony Kemp gets to meet Stella Darnell. But the story is told from the point of view of Stella, but they do get to meet. I just quite interested in seeing what these two characters would be like if I put them in the same room. So I'm only halfway through it at the moment, but I'm really enjoying the scenes which include them both. So Tony is in the next novel, but Freddie isn't, because finally it's a Stella novel. So I didn't want to. You've got to be to some extent not taking over, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, if people want to read them, I'd like to continue writing stories with Tony Kemp as well as Stella.
I would love you to keep writing Tony and Freddie. I think Freddie has to be part of it as well, though.
Okay, there might be some fish. I'll have to think. Special request by you, Caroline.
You'll have to work out a way to get the fish in. But no, they just, you know how Ellie sort of wrote the Harbinder book and it was going to be a standalone and then just became a series because it's amazing. You need to do the same with Tony and Freddie.
Well, I think, 2 books with her in it are kind of like, they're standalones, but yeah, they are a pair. And I think there will probably be a third one. As I say, of course, there is with this one, but there'll be a third one probably too. I mean, I think it's when you can't leave a character alone that you have to keep including them, really. And also, if your readers like them, there's no point in me writing these characters and thinking, oh, I really want to write this. And all the readers saying, no. So, but you're giving me good encouragement there.
Excellent. Well, I mean, if it helps, and it's not just from me, I spent a lot of time at Harrogate Festival chatting to Lynn Sindel, who says that The Companion is one of her favourite reads of the year.
I met Lynn just before Harrogate in Brighton. She was doing a tour of the British Isles because she's, for people who don't know, Lynn is one of my and Ellie Griffith's American readers. And I mean, she was Ellie Griffith's fan, and she got to read me through the generosity of Ellie Griffiths recommending me. And myself, William Shaw, and Ellie Griffiths met up with Lynn at a cafe on the beach in Brighton in what seems like a very different climate. It was boiling hot and it was beautiful summer's day. And she'd been to more places in the British Isles than I could say I've been to, I'd say. And she's just been such an encouraging, she's a great fan. She's a very active member of this group, isn't she? All the way from Florida, I think Florida and California. Sorry, I think it's California. But she's been lovely about the Companion. Very chuffed. So thank you, Lynn. If it's not in the middle of the night for you.
She is very honest as well. So I think if she is saying that she really has enjoyed the book, it is a book that she has.
Yeah, I think that's right. She doesn't suffer fools, as it were. Definitely, she's a discerning reader, and I've been very lucky because just today Ian Rankin has tweeted that he thinks that it's a treat of a book. So that made my afternoon when that came in. He's been very generous in the past, but this was lovely. So
that is quite a tweet, isn't it? Do you notice, like, if someone tweets sort of like Ian Rankin, or I saw CJ Tudor got retweeted by, like, a book got tweeted about by Stephen King. Does that make a lift in sales?
I have no idea. Ian, I'm sure Ian would say no because he's very modest. Who knows? We'd have to wait and see if there's a bounce. Of course, the thing is, I'm not particularly aware of it because I see the sales figures way ahead. So I don't, I'm way ahead of, or in the future from when the tweet was. So it's not like I can see it does that and then it does that. But it can only help, really, can't it?
You would think so, because I know some people get really grumpy about the endorsements on books by an author. That's like, I really like this, but they are one of the few things that will encourage me to buy a book if I don't know much about it. If I love an author and they're on a book saying this is a brilliant read, I'll be like, well, if they write it, I like their books and they like this, and
so it must work because I do get asked to. I do get asked to do, blurbs for other people, and I never know whether it's any good to them or not. They're very pleased, and and I'm very pleased. I mean, Ian's given me a blurb for my book in the past, and of course Ellie has, and when it's lovely. But I've no idea what difference it makes. So it's lovely to hear that people do actually bother to read. I'm always nervous to read the backs of books in any way in case there's a spoiler. So I tend to buy a book because it's by an author that I know, or I've read about it if I'm reading. I've just read a whole lot of stuff about the Second World War recently. Well, I still am, because the next book is partially set there. And the man does a kind of roundup of books published during the war, and I've been working my way through them. So I'm reading at the moment Malice Aforethought, which is brilliant if people haven't read it. I mean, it's described as a masterpiece, and I'm a bit late to the party, really, but it's a fantastic book written during the war. I have no idea what's going to happen at all, and it's gripping.
Who's it by?
Oh, Francis Isles. God, I thought I wasn't going to remember. Francis Isles, so Iles. And I really can't, I mean, I think there's probably a film. I feel there is. I'm sure I've even possibly seen a film. I'm not sure, but it's an absolute gem, I have to say.
Is there a lot of, so in the, I don't know the countryside around where the books are set, is there quite a lot of like Second World War kind of like remnants?
Yes, there are. Around, I mean, I grew up in London, which hasn't got, I mean, it's just got old buildings and all the rest, of course. But around here, in Sussex, there are a lot of what are called pillboxes, which are civil defence, well, actually, army too, structures that were occupied by, like, the Home Guard, for example, mostly the Home Guard, sometimes the army right on the coast. And they were basically boxes, kind of sometimes hexagonal, sometimes octagonal, with what gun holes, basically, so through which you could put a Bren gun or whatever gun it was. They had different size ones for the different guns. And they were ready to meet the Germans if they invaded. And they were disguised. They were often covered in turf. They did the brick of the pillboxes. They changed the colour. I mean, there's one quite near here where the pattern of the bricks, there's brown bricks at the top. And then there's lower down, there's red bricks. And it's kind of goes like that. And that was as kind of camouflage as much as it could be. So from the air, it would look like shading because it's built by an oak tree. And the oak tree would obviously put dappled light onto it. And it's just to kind of accentuate that. So it's camouflaged. And there's a lot of those. We go for a walk with the dog. We can, certainly along the river here, we can encounter 3 or 4 of them. And they often they've been hidden and they're just behind foliage. Sometimes they've been sort of stripped back and you can actually go in. I mean, they're not very nice to go in because, dogs go in, people chuck poo bags in. I won't go into detail. So you have to sort of take your life in your hands when you do. But it's fascinating to think that in these strange structures, I don't think I've got a picture. I was just thinking there might be and the point about this story I'm writing at the moment, now I think I've got a whole load. Oh, here we are. Yes, this is a good one. I'll give you an idea. In fact, that's exactly what I was talking about. So actually, you've got the brown bricks a bit there, and you've got some more there, and that tree would provide shade. So if an aeroplane's going by, it might not see that. It's a little bit. I can't see how it wouldn't myself, but the tree would have been smaller in the 1940s. But anyway, I've got a skeleton in one. Of course, being a crime writer, you see these things and you don't think, oh, Second World War, interesting. You think, I could put a body in there. So I did.
How much, as a crime writer, do you walk around and just think? Do you walk around when you're just out on your day out going like, oh, yeah, that'd be a good place for my next body?
Yeah, talk about companion. I'm not the greatest companion to go on a walk with. I mean, I'm sure I've said this before, but, you could be picnicking in a field under a tree, lovely, birds singing, and there's a sort of raised bit of ground, and I'm thinking straight away, oh, is there a body buried under there? And this will be a good place to bury a body. So I do. I am often, I'm seeing things in terms of plots and characters. And I mean, not all the time, because obviously I'm alive and I'm talking to people and I'm relating to people. But yeah, I do. I do see things. If they strike me, I start to think, what can I do with that? Well, what happened if you? What would you? So it does start to, the cogs start to whir.
Do you stop and just take photos of locations as well? To think that, I'm going to put that in my next book.
Yeah, well, my dad was a photographer. I mean, not by trade, but he always was interested in photography. And we had quite a small flat, but in the flat there was a sort of cellar at the back because it was in the basement of a big house. And right at the back was where the old wine cellars were. And it was a tunnel. And he made that into a dark room, and he had an enlarger in there, and he had a bench which he built with all his trays for doing developing. So I was brought up learning how to take pictures and develop them, and seeing him do it. And I think that probably gave me an eye for framing things, noticing objects. I mean, it was almost like a road not taken in terms of photography. I used to sometimes take author photographs for people, but it was never a way I wanted to earn a living. I found it too stressful, really, because in those days, you know, you were actually printing up the pictures. They might not work, and you wouldn't know until you developed it that there was nothing there. But it has left me with the habit of, when I'm starting to think about a location, I take a lot of pictures, and that sort of helps me to not just remember the location if I'm not in it anymore, but actually to enter the location myself when I'm there. I almost become a character. It sounds a bit pretentious, but it helps me to kind of like enter the atmosphere of the story, I suppose.
Before we move on, get up some hellos. So Laura said hello. Lisa Holloway, I think, said it's an exciting development. I think that was about Stella and Tony meeting.
Ah, hi, Laura.
Lesley Lloyd has said hello. Helen Eve.
Oh, yes. Yeah, Helen's come to my events. Lisa too. Yeah, well, they're piling in here. This is great.
And Juliet. Laura's commenting about the thing. She says she likes reading the blurb on the back, doesn't mind a few author reviews, but it does annoy her when there's no blurb, just reviews.
Oh yeah, no, well, yeah. I mean, I totally agree. But I'm just nervous when you read the synopsis kind of thing, that it doesn't say, and this was found there, and so was, I just get nervous, I suppose. But I mean, yeah. So, and I tend to kind of know what I'm going to buy before I buy it quite often. I'm not a great browser. I used to be more than I am now. I think that I've got so many things I want to read. They're just that to be read pile is always doing that, So I'm not doing much on spec, I suppose.
Mine does that, but I am a browser.
Well, that's good, because we need those as writers. Otherwise, people are stuck in their channels, aren't they? And they're not, experimenting, going outside their comfort zone.
No, I'd love to. I think it's the best thing is just going to browse and find a new author, especially if they've written a lot of books, and then you can go back and read all of them.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I really love that. Ruth Randall, I remember in the 80s. It must have been a bit later than that, but it got to the point when I was reading them as they came out, but I had a whole load that she'd been writing since the 60s. And I remember I had about 10 to get through. Oh, God, that's so exciting. It's better than chocolate, really, isn't it? Or better with chocolate, perhaps.
So the other thing I'm curious about is, because you're such good friends with Ellie and William, you three ever tempted to sort of have a cross sort of detectives appearing in each other's novels?
No, we haven't actually done that. I think there was a joke. We thought there was something that happened, and we thought that should be in all our novels, but I can't remember what it was, and we didn't do it. But I mean, Ellie and I have written a short story together, which was as much for our benefit, really. We haven't done anything with it. It may one day appear somewhere, but I think probably not now. But that was really good. We each took a chapter, and we each wrote our own. It was Ruth and Stella. So she'd write the Ruth chapter, I'd write the Stella chapter. And then we would look at each other's work to edit it and comment on it and change things. And so that did mean that I had to write some Ruth and she had to write some Stella. And that was a fantastic experience. It was very interesting to pick up. Ellie was picking up on the voice of Stella, and I was picking up on the voice of Ruth. I'm not sure that we'd actually want to ghost each other on a greater scale, but it was very interesting also to see our writing styles, and we thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, God knows what anyone would have thought of it, but we were both sitting at one point in a room together, cackling our heads off. We thought it was so funny what we were writing, but you had to be there, I think. Who knows? It was actually good enough for public consumption.
Are you teasing now? Because we know it exists and we're not going to see it.
Well, you never know. One day, it was called Ghost Footprints in the Snow, and Ruth and Stella meet on a photography short course at a place, and I've forgotten the name of it, but it was really based on West Dean College, where we both teach, in terms of the building. And we just had, as I say, a lot of fun writing it. And it made me realize that to some extent I could work collaboratively. I'm not precious in that sense. And in the old days, you'd see these well, I expect it still happens, comedy duos who write together, they're sitting at a desk both writing and passing stuff around. I could do that. I quite enjoyed it, but at the end of the day, I'm a solitary creature, and I prefer to be on my own in my shed.
You got some more comments rolling in. Lisa said she loved the Detective's Daughter series. Helen says she loves The Companion and is really looking forward to a new Stella book. And she wants to know how you created the creepy atmosphere in The Companion. Some of the scenes were so tense.
Well, it's a bit worrying, really, because these atmospheres are creepy, and people say that I've had several people writing saying I had to keep reading. I couldn't turn the light off. I was scared stiff. I checked the locks afterwards, all that. And when I'm actually writing it, I don't know if I'm in some sort of psychopathic state or something, but I'm just kind of writing it, and I'm not scared, and I'm not thinking, oh, this is really creepy. But I know that if I was then to read it myself, as if I was just a reader, I would find it creepy. I'm reading one of Jane Casey's book at the moment. I don't know if anybody's read any Jane Casey. She's fab. And I was put onto her by Ellie Griffiths. And then we met at Bloody Scotland last weekend. I'm reading The Killer in Me. And that is really creepy. And I'm reading it at night, and I can't put it down. And it's scaring the pants off me. And I think, well, you do this. It's actually right. To have it done to you, if you like. I'll tell you what she's doing that is so scary, but I seem to be able to do it too. Which, and that's great, but I don't like to scare people to the point of being really uncomfortable. There has to be a bit of humor there. And when Freddie and Tony are mates, and I think there's a certain safety there because of that. You're in safe hands, if you like. Because I'm not very good when books are really scary and you can't trust a single soul. I don't want to write that sort of book, and I'm too scared to read it myself, to read other people's like that. Domestic noir type books, probably, where you can't trust a single soul and your home isn't your own anymore, that sort of thing. Woo!
I wonder if with The Companion, it's a lot of things are left for you to figure out. If that makes sense, there's a bit of suggestion rather than it always being shown, isn't there? And that sometimes makes things more creepy.
Yes, I think that maybe is right, actually. You leave, well, I think it's something to do with leaving quite a lot to the imagination of the reader. And that, most readers' imaginations are pretty fertile. So they run off, and, you may not even be writing what they're scared of, but they thought of it, and so they're scared, and then the atmosphere just builds. And I think that's, I like the idea that I'm in some way in relationship with the reader. That they, I think that, it's not a book isn't a sort of dead weight. I know, okay, there's pages and it's finished, but when you read it wherever you're reading it, with whatever background you have and associations, and you either have never heard of me and you're reading it for the first time, or you've read a previous one. You bring so much that's individual to the story when you read, and I love hearing from readers and what they've thought. And sometimes it absolutely fascinates me because it's not what I expected. For example, Kind of Vanishing, which I wrote about 12 years ago, and it's about to be reissued sometime next year, I think.
There's a little poster of it behind you.
Yes, that's it. That's the first edition. My then publishers produced a poster. And it's set in a ruined village in Sussex, not far from here. And really all that's left, because, it was a Victorian village, and it was built and owned by a mill owner who had a water mill there and was for grain. And he would count people out to go to the pub in the evening and count them back in. They had to be in by a certain time. Then he closed the village gates. And then the mill went out of business. The course of the river was changed. Trains became it, etc., etc. And so it was a ruin. But during the Second World War, they worried that it would be a perfect place for Germans to set up if they invaded. They'd be there. They'd be sorted, and they could use it as a place from which to attack, etc. So they knocked down most of it. There's only walls standing now, occasionally this and there, and there's been a lot of work done on it. It's called Tide Mills, and it's been excavated. There are notice boards now that tell you what's what. But when I wrote the novel, there wasn't all of that. It was people had only just started excavating it and studying it. And I got a letter, well, not a letter, an email from somebody who said, I know where that is. And it's absolutely, you've described it absolutely how it is. But in my novel, the village isn't knocked down. The houses are still there. They're just empty. And the windows are sort of gaping eyes and the doors have come off their hinges. But they are houses. And he was saying, I remembered exactly like that. And he meant only like 3 years ago or something. And that was, for me, an example of, in his mind, he had recreated the village too. So his recreation and my recreation kind of met in the middle, which was, it's very exciting as a writer when you get that.
Well, I think probably the most terrifying book I've ever read was The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I couldn't read it at night, I only read it in the day, and I got to a point and I was like, I just need to get to the end now.
Yeah.
I'm too scared. Put it down.
Yeah.
And then, like, nothing happens really.
Oh, no, it's right.
It's just all left to your suggestion, so you were scaring yourself.
Yeah, and that's a really good example, isn't it, Caroline? Because funnily enough, I was doing this panel last week at Bloody Scotland, which was called Houses from Hell. And we were talking, it was all about, the three writers had all written stories that involved houses. Mine was Companion, but I've written others too. And somebody mentioned that book and said that was kind of like, you know, the pinnacle of a really scary story about a building. And it is. I mean, it's really scary. And yeah, nothing happens.
It is all your imagination.
Yeah. I've got in my mind, I read it about 10 years ago. I've got in my mind a memory of a table with food, but I might have made that bit up. But I mean, you just have this sense of violence, don't you? And threat. It's very good. And wasn't there didn't they do a televised version of it? Or am I getting it mixed up with something else?
They did, but I refused to watch them.
Yeah, I think you were right.
I think the movies and adaptations of things are always scarier.
Yeah, I think it was, I started off well, but it kind of descended into a sort of horror show. I mean, it wasn't, I felt it was, felt it was manipulating you and not in a good way. You know, it was playing with our emotions. Rather, in fact, I can't really remember it very well, but I remember not liking it by the end. It sort of ran out of control, really. So I think well missed, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a movie out at the moment that's based on a story by Joe Hill, and the story still haunts me, and I'm like, no.
Yes.
The movie.
Well, there are some stories, and I can remember we used to have a mobile library came round when I was young on a Monday night, and I took out a book by, God, it was called the Car of Gifford Hillary. And I can't remember, I never remember who it's by, and then I have to remind myself. The American writer, a sort of horror writer. I'll see if I can.
Well, I've heard of it.
I think you'll have heard of him. I think if I could only remember, somebody else might pop up with it before I get there.
I've heard of the title, and I don't know the author.
As it's not, and for people who don't know, it's not Car as in. Here we go, The Car of Gifford Hillary. Dennis Wheatley. It's Dennis Wheatley. I think he was writing in the 50s and 60s. And I just picked, that was an example of me picking a book off the shelf. Oh my God, I was so frightened. Even the name Dennis Wheatley makes me shiver, even today. I mean, I was probably about 12 at the time, so this is a good while ago. And I mean, I'd never want to see that on the telly, and I'd never want to read it again. It was really, I was really frightened in a not good way. It felt really disturbing. I felt somehow I'd actually experienced it, and I was having PTSD, if you can have such a thing from a book. Oof. Yeah, so there are some books, aren't there, that you can't even revisit. And I hope I'm not writing that sort, I have to say, really.
No, I don't think you are. I think there's a lot of scope to revisit. I definitely want to go back to Death of a Mermaid at some point.
Yeah, I do actually write the books with thinking that people might reread. I'm a great rereader myself. I mean, you know, I mean, take Elliot Griffiths. I mean, the Ruth books. You know, the last one is due to come out next year, and then there won't be others for whoever knows. And in between, because you know, when I start reading one, I can't stop really. So I've devoured it in about 3 days, and then it's like what? I reread her books. I've read The Crossing. I teach The Crossing Places actually, so I've read it about 5 times. And there's always something new. There's something I hadn't noticed before. And I hope that that's what people find if they do decide to reread me. I hope that they notice that, because, when you first read a book, you're cantering along, looking at the plot, and then when you go back, you realise, oh look, there's that. No, I didn't notice that. At least I hope you do. That's my idea. So
You've been asked who or what was the inspiration for the character and the companion who's a researcher for a novelist?
Yeah. I think me, really, finally. It wasn't really, well, it wasn't a real, it's not a real crime writer. I don't base my characters on real people. I think it was probably all a crime writer's worst fears. And also, I mean, I can't say too much about the character or I'll give too much away, but, I can say that she's a researcher for a crime writer. But it's kind of any crime writer, and she's any researcher, because it's not very difficult to make that sort of thing up, because you just imagine if you had a researcher, if I had a researcher, actually I wouldn't want one, because I need to do the research myself in order to really live the novel, like, as I was saying earlier, photographs, research, it all adds up. But it's not very difficult to make up the sort of character that might do that sort of job. And I wanted to create a character that was quite insecure and found ways to hide that, and lonely, because that's one of the themes of the story. In lots of ways, most of the characters are in the house are lonely, and this comes out in different ways.
Probably even beyond the house, actually.
Yeah. No, it's true, actually. Yeah. I mean, because Freddie's feeling lonely. Tony isn't. Tony's quite self-sufficient. But yeah, Freddie's, I mean, she's taken over what was her father's business, well, part of it, and she's this mobile fishmonger. She's on her own all day. She meets people, but she's on her own, driving around the villages and nearby towns. I mean, I personally would love that job. I would really, if I couldn't be a crime writer, I'd like to be a mobile fishmonger, really. So, I write myself into the jobs I'd like to have, and that will be one of them.
What other jobs would you like to have then? Where else have you written yourself in?
Well, as a taxi driver in House with No Rooms, I always wanted to be a taxi driver. I think I'd be a bit scared now, because you don't never know who's getting in your cab. But I wanted a job, and still like the idea of a job that involves driving, because I love driving. I'm sure it would be very bad for me, the sitting about all day, but I do that anyway, so I might as well move, I suppose. So yeah, being a taxi driver, bus driver. Oh, I mean, very much a train driver, which is why Jack is a train driver in the Detective Daughters novels. Haven't particularly wished to be a cleaner, so I can't say that's me. Although I notice when I do clean, I rather like charades. I clean in the manner of Stella, and that keeps me going. It inspires me to keep going, because she's so thorough, and she's got such high standards. But I have always fancied, when I was younger, to be a tube train driver, an underground train driver. I think not a train driver as in, the Southern Rail or wherever, so much. But I really like the idea of the underground. But I think now I'm too aware of what can go wrong, and the thought of sitting in the cab and behind you is about 2,000 people. Their safety is dependent on you doing everything properly. Not for me now, much too late, or possibly never was for me. But that attracted me.
We can live it through fiction.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the joy of writing. You can be anyone and do anything, really, up to a point. Yeah, and I love that. It's like one big dressing up cupboard.
I think this was Lisa wanted to know how they would get the Ellie Griffiths / Lesley Thomson book. How can we lobby your publishers?
I think you'd have to lobby us. Lots of drinks and chocolate.
We'll work out. We'll know where they are, and then we'll work out how to lobby them. We'll make a mission together.
Well, we did have. We went to, when we had to go to Bouchercon. It was just before lockdown, in the States, the big crime festival in the States. At the airport, we were at Starbucks, because they often are Starbucks at the airports. And, when you ask for a drink, they ask for your name. I never give my real name. I'm a bit neurotic at that. I mean, again, it's the crime writer in me. I know what can go wrong. Somebody's listening. Oh, your name is Lesley. Okay. And then because I hear other people's names, and then they call out the name when they've got the latte or whatever. So I always say my name is Stella when I buy a Starbucks. And when I was with Ellie in the departure lounge, she ordered a coffee which said Ruth, and I had one with Stella on it, and we sort of had our alter egos sitting on the table. Bit sad, I know.
I always just do the shortened version of my name, and then no one can ever spell it right.
Well, there is that, of course. yeah. I think I'm always been quite kind of I'm always been aware of what can go wrong, and that doesn't always work for people, but it works if you're a crime writer. It really does, because you really are you're taking any scenario and you're testing it, if you like, for all the possible leakages, and then you find them, and then you build them up, and then you've got your creepy atmosphere and your strange characters. So kind of that's how it works, I suppose.
You've been asked about where the idea for the companion came from, and I think probably more interesting is how you dreamed up the idea of these people having companions, because I don't know that that's a thing that exists.
Yes, it is.
I know in Amsterdam there are people who live in old people's homes, like students.
Yes, yes, I've heard. I mean, there are different projects. There are different projects both in Europe and to some extent here, but this all came about because of someone I knew who knew someone. So it was a couple of degrees of separation, who was doing just that. Had joined an organisation that paired younger people, not that young, and this person was in their 50s, with older people who, needed some companionship, as I say, needed a bit of help around the house. And it worked it was symbiotic in terms of each got something from it. And the idea being also that you actually developed a friendship with that person, despite the age gap. And this did work for the person I heard about. And it was a very good relationship. But always, as I say, I'm thinking, well, yeah, but what if it isn't? What could go wrong? What might, stymie that? And what if the companion has other motives for being a companion other than the ones stated? And so that's kind of where it came from. So it does actually exist. I mean, the organization, I invented the organization, which I called inappropriately Cuckoo's Nest, but appropriately for the story. But you really wouldn't want to call an organization that was supposed to pair people up together to be companions and have a friendship, Cuckoo's Nest, because it implies obviously that the companion is a cuckoo and really a misfit, which they are in the companion, as it were. But yeah, that's where that idea came from. But as with all my ideas, they start to develop and twist a bit. And, I get into it. I mean, I got into the whole idea of this organization. I didn't do a huge amount of research into the types of ones that exist. I made up my own because I was kind of, I was quite interested. It was almost, again, another job. I might have launched this company, but instead I'm writing about it in a book. But it fascinated me.
I like the clever little touch, and I think there's a lot of that in both The Detective's Daughter and The Companion, of just the name of the company being really clever.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe that should be my other alternative job. I could naming people's companies or something. I don't know. I mean, Clean Slate is obviously Stella's company. And that, I'm sure there is a Clean Slate. I have no idea. I mean, I'm not trying to register it, so it doesn't matter really. But I mean, when I hear the phrase on the radio, I think they've stolen my company name or Stella's company name. I have to remind myself, no, it's a phrase.
But I think it's a sign of like the quality of the writing as well. That you've gone to those sorts of, even like the name of the company sort of has a meaning to do with the story. And
oh yeah, I guess that's yeah, I mean, certainly is true of Cuckoo's Nest. So I guess, I mean, there's part of me, it's almost tongue in cheek, but yeah, it's thinking of wanting to, I mean, to be honest, I think it's very fair, if you like, in some way. And I hope I'm not any plot spoiling here, but to some extent, everything is some sort of clue. I mean, I don't write whodunits per se, but it's quite nice if the person doesn't necessarily guess who did it or did what. And actually, with the companion so far, I haven't had somebody say they did right from the start or whatever. And that's nice, but I do. I mean, that's where the second reading comes in, and you read it and go, "Oh, she did say that. Oh, if I'd only noticed that. Oh." And I think that's kind of going back to that relationship with the reader. That's fair. It's fair on the reader. I mean, I think there was I forget. I think it was Ronald Knox, the sort of 10 commandments of crime writers in the 20s and 30s. And one of them was don't. A murderer must never be somebody who enters the story at the last minute, because there's no fun in that. There's no interest in that. That it's not fair on the reader. They couldn't possibly have guessed who it was, and they mustn't take. I mean, they mustn't take intuitive leaps too often. That it doesn't make any sense, but it wraps the story up. So I do try to be fair to the reader, I suppose.
So Martin Edwards, he writes a very good kind of Deadly House. Is quite good at like showing you. He leaves his clues at the end of the book.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
He does it in the Rachel 7/8 series. He puts all the clues that he's hidden.
Oh, wow.
Throughout in the book.
Yeah.
So then when you go back for your second read, you can look.
Ah, okay. Gosh, I didn't know he did that. I wonder if he's done it. Yeah, I think I've read a couple of his, but they were both standalone. So I suppose he hasn't done it in that. He can scare you. Blimey. You'd never think it to look at him, but couldn't meet a nicer man, but whoa, scary books.
I just wondered if that'd be a thing you'd be tempted to do, so that people going back on a second read would be like, oh, that's where.
I think Mark, I mean, take Mark, he's got he's got a brain the size of a planet, quite frankly. And his brain would work in the way that he would think of the clue and he'd be able to list it. I wouldn't be able to list the clues I've embedded afterwards. I'd have to read it again and I'd have to go through it with a pen. And I wouldn't be able to do that because it's published, and I'd start noticing things I wished I could change. So that wouldn't work for me at all. I just don't have the kind of brain that can logically collect something like that. I do have the kind of brain that once the thing is written, I can dot about the book and think, well, if you do that and you dot something there and then you've got a repercussion there, I can do that because that's quite me anyway, quite sort of butterfly. So yeah, so I won't be doing that.
Mills Pixie said hello. So is Steve Munoz, another one of our lovely Californian members.
Ah, which one? Who?
Steve Munoz.
Oh, yes, right. Well. Yes. Hi, Steve. Hi, all the way from
California.
Good to see you. Fantastic.
We're quite a Californian UK CBC contingent at Harrogate.
Of course, that's right. Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, UK Crime Club is pretty global, really, isn't it? Actually, which is it's lovely. It reaches right out. It's a fantastic. I have to say, just briefly, it's a fantastic. I mean, if you're watching this, you're probably a member, but if you know somebody who isn't, tell them to join. Because you get great suggestions for books and stuff, don't you, as well?
You really do. Steve said that you're an interesting person to listen to.
Yeah, well, we met, I think, it wasn't you, Steve, I think you're wearing a really exciting shirt. I can't remember now, but I remember meeting you just outside the Swan. And I think there'd be, you'd come on the train with Michael Connolly, I seem to remember. Envy.
He definitely had come on the train with Michael Connolly. Yeah, I remember him telling me that story. Yeah. So one of my new favourite questions to ask is, what is your favourite read of the year so far?
Oh, gosh.
You can have more than one.
Good. I mean, to some extent, it has to be the book that I'm just read or am reading because I've got such a bad memory. And I'm reading 3 books at the moment. One is Jane Casey. One is the Francis Iles book, Malice Aforethought. And I'm reading he came out last year. It's a book by A.S. I have a real problem with this because it's John Stock is his real name. And I have a real A.S. Munro. That's right. A.S. Munro. I'm reading his book, The Man on Something Hill. and all 3 books are really gripping. So I've got sort of at different times of the day I read each of these. So I definitely vaguely recommend them, since I haven't told you titles properly. But anything by A.S. Monroe is great. I mean, he makes you not want to buy a Tesla. I tell you, should I even have been able to afford one? One of his books is Real Nightmare, where the car takes over. It's just like, oh no, I don't think so. But he writes. He's got very good elements of suspense in his books. I'm trying to think before. Oh well, part of my research for the Mystery of Yew Tree House is I'm reading books that are centered around the Second World War, and anything by Monica Dickens I would recommend. But I've just finished A Pair of Feet, and she wrote A Pair of Hands, which was about being a cook during the Second World War, or before even. And then she followed that up with A Pair of Feet, which is her training as a nurse in a hospital in 1940 something, 1942, I think. And it's so fun. It's not a crime novel, I have to say. Although, you know, the state of her feet is probably a crime. She works very hard, and it's all about the patients. It's a very kind book, but it's very real. And it gives you a sense of the time, but it also gives you a sense of the job, which won't have changed much in terms of the incredible long hours and hard work. And this is pre-NHS. And it's very funny though too. So I really recommend that as not so much a light read. It is a light read, but it's a good read as well. Sometimes light implies not, you know, a bit, but it's actually really good. So whether that's the best one this year, it's hard to say. But as I say, it's quite difficult for me to kind of remember what I read like a month ago. It seems to it goes into this miasma. So I'll stop there. If I think of something else, I'll say. But I think Malice Aforethought gets it at the moment.
So sometimes a book you're reading is just the best thing at the moment.
Well, I think there is that. Oh, I mean, I hadn't read any Kate Rhodes or Denise Minor, and I was driving back from Harrogate to Sussex with Domenica. I was driving, and I'd just seen Kate Rhodes. I'd met her once before, but years ago, and I met her again, and I was saying what a nice woman she was, and Domenica was saying she's a great writer. And I was also saying I really like Denise Minor. I haven't read her books. So Domenica had my phone, and Ellie Griffiths, I should say. And she went onto my Amazon page, and she was buying me books. She said, oh, I could get into this. So she bought me a Kate Rhodes, which was Hell Island, I think, something. And she bought me The Long Drop by Denise Minor. And I read both those books, and they were both in completely different ways fantastic. So there's 2 more that takes us back to almost July, I think, and then it's a mist.
You've been complimented on your jumper.
Ah, thank you. Who was that? Or was it Facebook user?
Facebook user and Mills both say that they like your jumper.
Oh.
Very cozy.
Yeah, it is. I think it's got to that time of you. I mean, it looks as if you're warmer where you are, but it's been very chilly in Sussex today, and so it's definitely jumper weather.
It's jumper. I had a jumper. I don't know what I've done with it, but yeah, it's definitely warmer here. Yorkshire is nice.
It certainly is. I can vouch for that, having been there recently.
And you've been asked if Yew Tree House is a real place.
I mean, I do sort of find houses and think you'll do. And there is a house in a village not far from here, which is double fronted, and it's got a little bit of garden at the front. It's quite a big house, not massive, and big porch and front door. And I've not been inside it, so I don't know any more than that. So the front of the house is kind of based on that. And it's set in Bishopstone, the story, which actually does exist. But I have mashed together Bishopstone with a much larger village, I should say, because Bishopstone's very small. It's really a hamlet. I've mashed it together with another village called Lindfield, which is about 15 miles from here, I suppose, because I wanted a bigger village than Bishopstone is, much though I love Bishopstone. And it had to be Bishopstone, and I had to name it because it's not giving anything away that Jack and Stella go to visit a grave of someone who's buried there, and it's named in in The Detective's Daughter, so I'd get a lot of emails if I changed the name of the village to suit me and make it up. But I have made up the size of the village, and I'll apologise in my acknowledgements for playing fast and loose with the architecture and the design and topography. But yeah, so it's partially based on a real house in terms of the front, but the rest of it is made up.
Tell us a little bit about your course that you teach at Westdean College, because I think it's intriguing.
Yeah, it's Ellie Griffiths and I, we set up a crime writing certificate with the help of Westdean, and particularly Mark Radcliffe, who runs the MA there. And it's 3 weekends, if anyone's interested. And you have to show that you are writing. You have to be a serious writer and bring some material written, which Dr. Radcliffe, Mark Radcliffe, would read. And over the 3 weekends, I teach the first one, which is coming up in November. Domenica, I keep saying Domenica because that's, as some people will know, her real name. But Ellie Griffiths teaches the second weekend, which I think is in January, and round about June, we both teach together the third weekend. And we cover all the sort of aspects of writing, and particularly, obviously, crime writing. We ask people to read various books, and we discuss them. And we look at building character, creating suspense, creating those creepy atmospheres. And for the last weekend, and we ask people not to actually write much in between, because each weekend gives them more. So if they write something, they don't only have to revise it. They can if they wish, it's up to them. But in the last weekend, the Sunday morning is given over to Graham Bartlett, who's now actually a published crime writer, but he was a high-ranking detective in the Sussex police force, and he was one of Peter James's kind of go-to detectives in the early days. And he comes along and he creates a crime scene in the room. So it's very exciting. You see all these yellow cones and everything, and chalked body. Well, I don't think he does the chalked body, actually, because you don't do that nowadays. And he interviews us both as if we're criminals. So we've got the brief of what we both are supposed to have done and not done, and whether we claim to be innocent or guilty. And I can now claim to have been interviewed by a pretty tough police officer. And it was very interesting process. But it was role playing, but it was for the sake of the students, obviously, to see how he can, a character can be manipulated, or what they end up saying and how they're treated. And he backs that up with sort of information about how you would conduct an interview. And then the students go away and produce 5,000 words, first 5,000 words of a crime novel, which Ellie Griffiths and I read and give them a page of feedback. And we've done one cycle so far, and 3 of the people on that course have gone on to do the MA in creative writing. We're about, as I say, we start the next cycle this year in November. So there's still time to enroll if you wish, if anybody's interested. Unfortunately, we haven't got an online version, because it'd be great to have the likes of Steve or Lynn along, but never mind.
It does, yeah. Steve said it sounds like a wonderful course. I have literally just finished Graham Bartlett's.
Yeah, good to be, bad to be. Yeah, I've got it here. I can't remember, but anyway, I really enjoyed it. Did you?
It's very dark. I did enjoy
Yes.
it, but it's very dark.
Very dark. Yeah, absolutely. That I didn't enjoy, but that's part of the story. But you're really involved in it, aren't you? And obviously, in terms of a police officer, he knows his stuff, so it was quite educated too in some ways. But yes, it was dark.
Yes, very dark. I tend to veer towards a cozy crime, so I was like,
yeah. Well, as you know, as I was saying, me too, in a sense. I mean, cozy, as in my jumper. There can be a bit of no, I won't carry on with that analogy. I'll get into a pickle with jumpers and crime novels. But I think I have to feel cozy when I'm reading. I have to be sort of, like I'm dressed today, and maybe a cup of tea, a bar of chocolate, something, and settle in. But I don't want to be really upset and scared. That's not, that's not really. It's like I said at the beginning. I need to feel in safe hands, really, which is why I'm such a fan of, say, Ellie Griffiths, for example. because you know you are in safe hands with all her characters, with the ones that are the main characters. And
Although I had a horrible moment in her latest book of not feeling in safe hands. I had a moment of panic.
Well, but you know you are really, though, don't you? I suppose, but they will. Yeah, I know what you mean.
You know you are really, but I was like, we almost weren't friends.
Ooh, that's interesting. Which one was that? The locked room. I can't ask you about it, unfortunately.
No, because it would be a spoiler. So we
yeah, it would be. And I'm trying to think when I felt that, and I can't say, and you can't say. So we'll leave it there, shall we?
We'll leave it there. We've only got a few minutes left,
Okay.
So we need to go back to the companion. Give us a reminder about the companion. People are going to go and buy it and all of your other amazing books.
Well, it'd be lovely if you go to a library or you go and buy it, whichever. I think, I mean, I intended it to be, and I intend this next book to be too, quite Christie-esque, if you like. It's a sort of updated Agatha Christie. So we've got the stately home, we've got the murders, and the detectives coming. The difference is it's not a stately home owned by some earl or something. It's as I said, divided into flats. But there is that same feel about it in terms of the kind of novel, because I'm finding more and more I'm going back to the kind of golden age of crime writing, the greenback penguins, if you like. Dorothy L. Sayers, Marjorie Allingham, obviously Agatha Christie, Nao Marsh, and I'm discovering other ones that aren't so well known now. I want to write that sort of novel. So The Companion is an example of that. It's not cozy, but it's not dark, I would say. I mean, that's what I intended anyway. And you are in safe hands with Tony and Malcolm and Freddie. And I hope there's some humor in it. I mean, people have said they found bits funny, and that was the intention. It's not very good if they laugh at the bits that you're not, they're meant to be scary, but mostly they seem to have laughed in the right places. So I guess is that enough?
No, I think you summed it up perfectly, because I think there is an appetite for that kind of golden age of crime fiction, sort of updated for the modern time now. It seems to be very popular.
Yeah, well, I think I've always said to students, and I talk about it with other crime writers, write what you like to read, because you can't write what somebody else would like to read, because you don't know that someone else. You only know you and your mates, and they don't all like to read the same things. So write what you like to read. And that's what I'm enjoying reading. So, I mean, I talk about Malice Aforethought. That's an example of that. Sort of garden parties and village and sunshine and a nasty man who may or may not murder somebody. But yeah, so I like to write what I want to read.
And I think you succeeded with The Companion.
Thank you.
It was a very good read.
Oh, well, I mean, coming from you, that big praise. Thank you, Kaz. Thank you.
And then all that's left to say is show us all the cover again, just because it's lovely.
It's a lovely cover. I had nothing to do with the cover, but I do love it. I'm seeing it back to front, but hopefully you're not.
No, we're not. No. You see it the right way around on here.
Yes.
And then thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's more than a pleasure. Thank you, everybody else, for joining as well. Thank you. And from the States and across the pond and everywhere. Thank you.